Hello, everyone. Today I'm going to be discussing why inclusion is needed and how to better provide inclusion in a classroom setting. So you may be asking yourself, what exactly is inclusion? Well, have you ever heard someone who works in education say something along the lines of, oh yeah, we're a school that practices whole inclusion. Or maybe we try to practice inclusion to the best of our abilities. So, to answer your question, inclusion is when a student, despite of their disabilities, is in a general education classroom with other students who do not have disabilities. And the goal of inclusion is to create an environment that values and includes all students, no matter their abilities. Students with disabilities are expected to achieve academic and emotional success while learning beside peers with disabilities or without disabilities, excuse me. So pretty much students, disabilities and without disabilities alike are in the same classroom and being educated the same way. There just might be a teacher's aide in there to help students who need more assistance. Now, there are some factors to consider when deciding where to educate a child. Now, I'm going to put a lot of emphasis on the word where, because this aspect does not mean like where are you going to place the child? It means whether or not we're going to decide if inclusion is best for this child. Not saying they shouldn't be included in things, but it's something to consider when viewing their grade level, where is best for them. Say, if a fourth grader is testing at a first and second grade level, is an inclusion classroom the best idea for him? Not really. If he was only a year or a year and a half behind, it would be pretty beneficial for him. But him being so far behind, it would not be beneficial for them to sit in on their class. But here are some factors to consider when deciding where to educate a child: race and culture, language, empathy, individual differences, appropriate inclusion, and prejudicial placements. Now, the first one we'll be discussing is race and culture. Now, race and culture is a subject that they need to be careful on because you cannot influence a placement by depending on these things, because this has nothing to do with a student's mind, with their ability to think, with anything like that. So you cannot make a placement on this. These factors should be considered when, for example, if the student is struggling with a certain material, you need to try and help them relate to this. So a good way to help them relate would be to incorporate their own culture into the subject to give them a better understanding. Another topic to consider is language. Now, this does not just have to mean a student does not speak English well. It could mean that they have communication issues, that they're slow to language. It could just mean something like that. Now, one of the things you need to do is never assume a child's language difficulties equal a lack of intelligence. That is very important. Just because a child has trouble speaking a certain language or just talking in general, it does not mean that they are lacking any intelligence. Instead of assuming a child has a learning disability from their lack of language skills, have the appropriate testing done. This is very important. There was a study that I read and got some of my information from about a student named Raul, who was originally from Mexico. Now, his first language was not English, and he did fairly well in school, except for in English class. He struggled with reading and just was not doing very well, but his teacher, before taking any tests into consideration, made assumptions, because in all of his other subjects, when it came to reading material, even in math or in history, he excelled. He did fine with that reading material. It was just something he struggled with, and they tested him for moving him to a special education classroom when it was not needed, and it ended up putting him even farther behind on his educational journey. So assumptions are you need to be very careful with assumptions. Another factor is empathy. We need to always keep in mind that a student's behaviors and how they relate to their disabilities is important. Behaviors and disabilities can coincide. You need to relate those things when working with these children. You need to be optimistic and supporting. Be on the student's team. Do not be their rival. Empathy is important in any classroom setting, not just an inclusion environment. Any environment, you need someone that can be empathetic to your situations. Individual differences is another factor to consider. And one big thing, differences do not equal deficits. I'll say it again, differences do not equal deficits. Differences need to be valued. Differences set people apart, and that is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to be set apart. Teach students that they learn from each other's differences. Now, if you were in a classroom and you were in a classroom setting and say you were doing group work and another student might have a completely different perspective of things. Differences bring in new perspectives, bring in new insights. That's a good thing. Now, another thing is this lets students with disabilities know that it's okay to be different and helps them normalize being around different students. I use that. I shouldn't, but that's how our culture perceives it. Now, appropriate inclusion is next on the factor list. This can help reduce bias in our classroom. That is so important. When a child feels that there is bias against them, they are not going to want to open up to you if they're struggling about something. This helps every child feel included since there's fair treatment all around. And children that are non-disabled can benefit from this as well. When you block out children from people who are different, when you whisper and don't encourage them to ask questions about people who have disabilities, that automatically sends a message to their brain that says, oh, something is wrong. I shouldn't be talking about that. It's wrong. I shouldn't talk about it. And that's not good because there is nothing wrong. People are disabled and children need to understand that if they're ever going to grow up and actually see them as members of society. Questions are okay. And it is important to not show bias. Okay, prejudicial placements. This is a very important factor as well. They can have lasting negative effects on students, especially if this decision is rushed. Placements do not need to be made on thought and assumption alone. They need to be made because the teacher has has tried every other option, and these are just the facts laid out in the best placement for the child. Not the teacher has assumed and just doesn't want to deal with it anymore kind of situation. Now, this can also place bad effects on a student's relationship with other classmates. When that student isn't around the other classmates as much, they're in a whole other room most of the day. That affects their relationship with their classmates. It makes them feel different. It makes them feel segregated from everyone else. This can also affect a student's view of the school or educator. And you don't want a student to feel separated from everything. You don't want them to, if anything, if they didn't like their peers, they should be able to confide in their educator, in their school. That's a safe place. Now, here are some models of co-teaching that are helpful in inclusion classrooms. One way is the one teach, one assist. This is where one teacher provides instruction while the other assists those who need additional support. And this type allows students with disabilities to access general curriculum and in that classroom. And this also helps students without disabilities when they need additional support as well. The second one, station teaching. Station teaching is when the students are split into 3 different groups. 2 work with the teacher and 1 works independently. After a certain amount of time, the students will rotate placements. This gives students opportunities to have small group work and also receive instruction from their teachers. Now, there's also parallel teaching. This is a This is when teachers plan together. And then they split the students into 2 groups and give them the same lesson within the smaller groups in the same classroom. This gives students opportunity to also receive small group instruction, and also gives educators an opportunity to learn from each other and see how they need to grow and see which way worked better with which students. Now, alternative teaching is another way as well. One teaches while the other will pre-teach or even reteach to the students who need additional support. This is my personal favorite. I think it would be very beneficial for a lot of people. This can help teachers not have to worry about, well, the one teacher teaching it, they don't have to worry about the students being behind because they'll already have the lesson pre-taught, and that person will be there again to remind them and be like, hey, you don't remember? We went over that earlier. Kind of help spark things back up. It can also help the teacher stay on track with the rest of the class. Now, the last one is team teaching. Both teachers give instruction together at the same time to the same students. So it's kind of like double teaching, they're teaming up. All the students will have access to the same teachers at the same time within the same general education classroom. That one is also a very inclusive one. You could do it a lot of different ways. Someone teach this part of the lesson, someone teach this half, you teach this certain subject, you teach this subject. They could go a lot of different ways with that one. But those are just a few models of co-teaching that are helpful in inclusion settings. Now, that's the end of my presentation. Inclusion is so important, especially in today's world when all of these topics are becoming less and less taboo, if I can use that language, that word. So lots of people are wanting to learn about it and asking questions. It's okay to ask questions, just remember that. Okay, I hope this gave you some new perspectives on how to better include disabled students into the general education classroom. Make sure to research for yourself as well. Thank you.